does it promote stability, mobility, etc. for our clients? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to start off simply by asking, what is seated stability? Why do we want it? And definitely what we're looking at is having that capacity to maintain postural control over the trunk through a stable pelvis, which doesn't alter in orientation or motion as a result of active movements in what we call both resting and working posture. So what we're looking at is we want to have stability when we're sitting in a resting posture. But what's a working posture or an active posture? Where does that come into play? Anybody? This is interactive today.
That'd be weight shifting.
Weight shifting, okay. I'm reaching. Okay, so I'm reaching for something as an active posture. What else is another active posture that we do when we're sitting, potentially in a wheelchair? Getting dressed, putting something over our head, leaning down to put our socks on. What else could we be doing? In this chair I can't, but propulsion, arm propulsion, foot propulsion. So those are active working postures that we still need stability for. And in fact, that's when we even need more stability so that we can perform the function without losing our body in position in space, and more typically known as sliding out of the chair. So that's what we're looking for with seated stability. And seated stability is traditionally affected by, first of all, immersion. Does everybody know what immersion is? So immersion is if you imagine taking your knuckles, putting them into this cushion, I'm going down into it, and now I've got more surface contact around my knuckles. So another way of talking about that, which I like to use when I'm teaching to, clients or family, is that when you put your knuckles, if you all do that on the back of your hand, there's very little immersion going in there. But if you go onto your forearm, you see it go down into the muscle. Now we got some immersion. We also have surface tension here, less surface tension here that allows us to get into that material. And when we slide your knuckles, you have friction. When you have immersion, we have less friction. But now we have more chance of shearing, because shearing is now on the underneath. But when we come in to the muscle, we have immersion. Where is the shearing happening is going to depend on surface tension, how much immersion, surface contact, etc. So we really want to take a look at our cushions when we're putting our clients on them of how much immersion, how much surface tension is there, what kind of friction is happening, potentially how does that affect shearing. And ultimately, we want to gain seated stability in order to prevent postural asymmetry, right? So we don't want our clients who often are sitting, when you get a client seated in a flat chair with nothing underneath them, the tendency is, okay, I've got to offload. I'm going to come over here because that bum is getting, now this bum is getting sore. And we start coming into these asymmetrical postures, which we don't want, because for our clients, we can get out of them, they cannot. So they become more non-reducible back to midline. And now we start getting issues with spinal curvatures and obliquities, etc. That is a challenge for our clients. The other thing that we get is pain. When we get peak pressure points, then we're going to have pain where we have that instability or that landing on a bony prominence. And lastly, access to propulsion, whether it's on the wheel or on the floor without deviation of the trunk or pelvis. So in order to maintain good propulsion, we want to be able to have the capacity for our arms. Of course, I mess up the one that I want to show the most. Here we go. When we're propelling our chair, we want the propulsion to come through the arms. We don't want to go through the arms and lose it through the pelvis, because now we're not getting as good of a movement forward. The same with foot propulsion. When I'm foot propelling, I want the propulsion to come through the chair and the wheels, not me sliding on the cushion. So I need that stability to maintain that active movement while I'm moving through that system. Now you could even say the same, that when a client's in a power chair, yes, all they have to do is accommodate through the hand or head control. But if you can imagine a person in a power chair with a head array system on a cushion that's not stable, now they're coming out of their head array or out of their chin control, and or even their hand coming off of the joystick. And how many clients have you seen driving a power chair where all of a sudden their elbow is here, right? And so that can come from cushion instability as well. So everything comes back to the pelvis, and we have to maximize that posture and stability of the pelvis in order to function in everything that the client is doing day to day. Now, history says, and believe it or not, I was still practicing when I took this picture over here, okay, and this one. So we have here on the far side, somebody who thought comfort was softness, and they kept adding pillows. But now we have total instability. So that client is still very uncomfortable. And then this client here, this was the old Spinko pad that was feathers, you know, a down comforter put in the chair to make it more comfortable. But there's absolutely no stability, and you can see that she's going to be sliding right out of that chair. So a lot of people have in the past thought that comfort comes from softness, but indeed, comfort comes from balance. And when you're balanced, you're going to be more comfortable than when you're not. And so if I can get, because I do this, everybody's going to stand up for me. Oh, we have to work today. So standing 2 feet on the ground, you're comfortable. Now you're going to stand with 1 foot. And that comfort level, now you're thinking about what your body's doing. Put your foot down again. And now you're not thinking about standing. You may sit down. And one of the things that my mom taught me, my mom had major disabilities through her life and went from crutches to scooter to wheelchair all the way through. And one of the things that she said when she was moving from between kind of the time of a walker to a wheelchair is that when we were walking, she said, "Don't talk to me." I'm like, well, why? Why am I talking? And it's no, I have to concentrate on just taking a step. And that's the same thing with our clients. When they're not balanced and stable, they have to concentrate on being that in order to function. But if you're concentrating so much on that, you can't function. So that's why we really have to take a look at this stability. What is stability? What is comfort? And then lastly, what is pressure management? Now, pressure management absolutely is getting the immersion and getting increased surface area. We all know that equation, but we also want to take a look at how do we gain that pressure management? What does that immersion or surface contact, surface tension feel like to the client? And when we started talking, 40 years ago, cushion was the thing to be on if you needed pressure management. That's what everybody, nursing staff, get them. However, the initial air cushion was prescribed for mostly non-sensate clients. It was the spinal cord injury population. And they all got a sling Everston Jennings chair and they really weren't propelling very far or very fast. It's the new technology that has changed how our seating looks because we're now moving through space faster, over more environments, through vibration. And so we have to start taking a look at how is this air contained, not just to give pressure management, but to give dynamic stability. 2 words that you would never think to put together, okay? But we have to take a look at that. But lastly, we also have to make it comfortable because now we're not just putting non-sensate clients on dynamic air cushions. we're putting people with sensation on them. And if I haven't never sat on original cushions to now ones that are being developed, and you're going to get a chance to sit on these today, you'll see that there's a huge difference. And people don't like sitting on the original egg crate cushion is what they will call it, because that's what it feels like, are these pimples coming into their skin when they're sensate. So we really have to take a look at what is an air cushion or a dynamic air cushion, and how is that air contained? And the question lies, do they cause sliding? Do they cause shearing? Do they cause poor stability and poor function? Well, it all depends. And it really does all depend on how that air is contained to give that amount of immersion and or dynamic stability. So, do air cushions aid or hinder propulsion? So when we start taking a look at dynamic pelvic mobility, I want you to put your hand underneath your one IT, or both if you want. I do need your feet on the floor for this. Sorry for the short people in the room. Now I want you to foot propel. Do you feel any movement through your IT? Absolutely. So you know that in foot propulsion, I need to keep the pelvis back in the chair so that the pelvis goes with the chair instead of the pelvis before the chair. But I also need to have some amount of dynamic movement of the pelvis, because that's inherent in the physics of foot propulsion. The pelvis is going to move forward and back, rotate posterior, anterior. So I need to have some type of shear reduction underneath the IT, but also stability to stop it from moving forward out of the chair. So I need to have dynamic pelvic mobility. I have to worry about shearing, but I also have to have rotational stability. So I want to have rotation, but I don't want it to slide out of the chair. I need to consider of how can I get positioning to prevent asymmetries. So I want to think about, does the client have a tendency to go into obliquity, or a tendency to go into posterior pelvic tilt or anterior pelvic tilt? And I want to look at how can I stabilize the femur and the greater trochanter, so again, that I can maximize stability when they're hand propelling, but as well as foot propulsion. And when I'm looking at lower extremity excursion for that foot propulsion, I need to think about the contours and the depth and the front seat depth for that lower leg movement as we're coming forward and back. So if you take your foot and imagine yourself doing that foot propulsion, if you're going to be a true one that comes all the way under, you start hitting the front edge of your chair. So you have to look at having stability of the cushion through underneath the back of the thigh, but then undercut back to the front of the chair in order to allow for that excursion to occur if your client is a full heel to toe propeller. So again, through all of that propulsion, we have to maintain the thought about pain relief as well, because we are working with sensate as well as non-sensate clients. So they have to feel good and they have to feel comfortable and not creating pain when they are propelling or having that dynamic shifting. So we have to think about how is the air contained, because today we're talking about air cushions, but thinking as well about, for example, gel or foam cushions, how do they do the same? So we always know traditionally foam cushions are awesome for stability, but right now, sitting on your chair, which is a foam cushion, do that foot propelling without your hand underneath there. And you can feel that movement against the foam. So if you were doing that all day, would you start shearing underneath your IT on the foam cushion? Because it's good and stable, you're not falling out of the chair, but you don't have that dynamic rotation that's being protected underneath the IT on a foam type of base. So when you're looking at assessing your client for different materials for a cushion, what you want to do is say, what is your goal? Absolutely, this should be number one. maximizing comfort. And it's funny, I went to a white paper session in the States. It's probably 20 years ago, but that was also 20 years after I started my practice. And it was the first white paper session that actually sat down and talked about comfort. Up until then, everything had been about pressure relief, postural stability. But what about comfortable? If people aren't comfortable, it's going to go in the closet. And they're not going to get in their chairs, they're not going to be in their chairs. So we have to think about comfort. And so we do have to ask, what do you like to feel? Do you like to feel hot or cold, soft or hard? How is that feeling to you? And more often than not, people will tell you that I like to feel balanced. And the balance preposes to the feeling of comfort. And so if you're balanced, more than likely, you're going to stay on that surface longer. So think about what you sit on at home. Do you sit in the kitchen chair all day? I actually do, because mine is a bar stool that's nicely rounded and soft, and it's really good. And I feel balanced on it because I have back problems, so I don't have to lean back into a soft couch that's too soft, and I'm not balanced and I'm not supported. So comfort is an important question to ask our clients. We have to look at what their function is. Are they dependent or independent? What is their mobility? Are they foot propellers, hand propellers, power propellers? What do I want to do to facilitate participation? Are they always sliding? When are they sliding? Are they only sliding during propulsion? Are they sliding while they're getting dressed? What's happening? How can I facilitate that participation more to make them more a part of their functioning life? I know that I want to maintain pressure relief, but look at where I put it, down in the middle. It's not always number one. And often a pressure injury has occurred because somebody's been uncomfortable and has been moving too much. So we have to think about those things before we come down about maintaining that pressure relief. We definitely want to decrease shearing. We want to enhance moisture protection because we know that all of those create pressure injuries. But we also want to maintain stability at the same time because we know if we don't have stability, then we have more likelihood of shearing, friction, and sliding. So we want to, how do we work with all of that and make it all work at the same time? And lastly, it's got to be easy to use. Keep it simple, right? Easy to use for long-term care, is easy to use for the client to function on their own. So we've got to make sure that everybody can use this cushion easily. So just back to comfort again, which I've kind of already alluded to, it's a subjective state based on sensation as well as balance control, a state which is void of pain or discomfort. So definitely inappropriate or a lack of supportive seating can create pain through poor posture, forces on inflexible joint ranges, peak pressure points due to a lack of immersion, where we're not reducing pressure, or because of balance problems for the client. So those are right out of the dictionary, and that's what we're taking a look at. So going back to that traditional, everybody needs a for pressure management, but does pressure management necessarily equal comfort? No. So everybody's determination, I'm going to ask you, do you like to be on soft or rounded, firmer? Okay. Who likes rounded, firmer? Yeah. So everybody's different. So we have to ask that. We have to understand, what does comfort mean to each person? So we really have to take a look at sitting over a period of time. A cushion assessment shouldn't take 5 minutes because you cannot determine the feeling of anything. I'm in the process right now of trying to buy a new mattress, right? You go and lie in the store and go, yeah, I think this might be okay. Can I sleep here tonight? You know, like you really have to have that length of time to understand, but you also have to take your client through a range of activities on that cushion to understand how they move, how they feel, how they reach, how they transfer, etc., to make sure that that cushion is going to work for them. How do they move in and out of it? How does it change based on their sensation? And so here we have a bunch of clients where they're sensory intact still with MS, MD, post-polio, aging, older adults, lower extremity amputations, versus the sensory impaired, which is, you know, your spinal cord injury is such a small market of the huge market that we now see. So we have to understand, though, that with the sensory impaired, for them to feel comfortable, they have to feel balanced. So that is their comfort zone. They don't have the sensation, but if they're not balanced, they're not comfortable, okay? So stability absolutely enhances comfort. And so if we have poor seating, that's going to lead to say that your client is going to be uncomfortable. And pain becomes their primary focus. How many of you have ever had a mosquito bite? It becomes itchy. We'll even call it painful at times. But what do we sometimes do to make that mosquito bite less itchy? Put your fingernail in it. Ever done that? Where you add more pain to take away that sensation. So definitely what happens is people focus on the pain, and I don't want to do anything else. And if your bum starts hurting after a half an hour in here, you're not going to listen to me anymore. You're thinking, God, can she be finished? I want to get out of here, right? Okay, so definitely you get this dependence in occupations of life, resistance to care, confused, aggressive behavior, where people fully withdraw and become depressed. They don't want to be involved anymore. So poor seating can also lead to asymmetries where they have that tendency to pull away from midline. They're leaning onto the armrest, they're sliding down into the foot plates or sliding down into the backrest to get their bum off of the cushion. So we really can see that poor seating altogether leads to discomfort and asymmetry, and that's not what we want. So pressure management is definitely more than just prescribing an air cushion. And unfortunately, I'm probably preaching to the choir right now. It's the nursing industry that we need to teach to say there's more than this, because they are still the ones that are still saying just cushion. And because they don't understand all the other aspects that we have learned about seating and mobility. So the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're prescribing a cushion is, what's the level of activity? Does a cushion promote stability or mobility? How far is the client going? What is their level of mobility? How much do they move within the chair? How active are they? How much do they reach? How much do they lean forward? Do they lean to the side? What are they doing? Are they getting dressed? Are they propelling? Is there going to be an issue with moisture and incontinence and airflow and heat? And lastly, is there going to be issues with shearing and vibration? And as you all saw, and actually I didn't do the second half, I want you to pull your backs away from the backrest of your chair, feet down. This time I want you to hand propel. And do you feel any movement in your pelvis when you're doing that? A little bit. If you're not against the back of the chair. Now back into the chair, give yourself a good back support and try it. You feel less because now you have more support. But if we think about our clients who are traditional wheelers and they're wheeling up a hill, they move their center of mass forward in order to get that propulsion forward. Now they're no longer on the backrest, and so you're going to have a lot more of that dynamic pelvic movement when they're in that chair, okay? So even hand propellers have dynamic pelvic mobility that we have to worry about shearing and vibration, and absolutely do we need that movement to be promoted or prevented. So we always need some prevention for sliding out, but we always have a little bit of pelvic rotation that's natural in the physics of propulsion. So we have to get a little bit of both. And again, coming back to balance, again, the client has to feel balanced and stable. Asymmetrical postures developed by the need of the body to become balanced. So that's where they go off of midline, but they can't come back. And recognizing that posture was left in the 1990s where we are no longer 90, 90, 90, and we have to support posture where it needs to be, trying to get it back to midline, but working within the tendencies of the client of reducible or non-reducible postures. So definitely the pelvis is the foundation to all stability and comfort. I'm not saying that the spine and head aren't, but it has to start at the pelvis. If we don't start at the pelvis, we are never going to make the best seating choices for our client. And also the pelvis is not going to always necessarily sit in symmetry. So if you all just kind of lean slightly to the left, I'm to the right, you to the left, and then sit there and think, okay, now I'm in obliquity. Keep your neck and spine where it is. Put your hand underneath your pelvis on the side you're leaning to. Lean over. And now you're sitting, you've corrected that obliquity to get your head back to midline to feel balanced, okay? So definitely we want to bring that pelvis back if we can, but what happens if, I want you to take now your pelvis into obliquity, take it there, which doing that and then bring your head back to midline. If I try to correct that pelvis with everything else that's non-reducible, I'm gonna put you over here and you're not gonna feel balanced. So we have to understand in our mat assessment what's happening with that pelvis. Is it reducible or non-reducible? And how am I going to promote its efficiency either in midline or supported in the asymmetry that it sits? Ultimately, what needs to sit at midline? The head. Okay, so the head is your midline point of balance because that's where our brain is. That's where the vestibular system is that says you're balanced, okay? So ultimately, that's what we're looking for. And then we take the pelvis where it needs to be to hold that head in midline. So traditional seating basically always only thought about vertical, 90, 90, 90, pressure ulcer management, and the comfort of sensates was not, sensate clients wasn't considered. Now, I'm sorry, it kind of cut off at the bottom there, but basically now we're looking more at seat shape, cell shape, immersion, envelopment. Where is gravity being applied to the body? Where is the center of mass of the body? How does that center of mass move as we move from resting posture to working posture? What is pain? What is balance? What is shearing? And how does that all work together to maintain the client's function? So that's a whole lot more that we need to assess from what we did before. So this is definitely the equation that we all learned in school, pressure equals force over area. Now, way back, again, 40 years ago, we always just said, force is force. Force is gravity. I can't change gravity, so I'm not going to do anything about it. Wrong. Okay? So pressure, we can change by increasing area to decrease pressure, right? So we've always said adding contour or immersion increases surface area, so that's going to decrease pressure. But we can change force because we can change where gravity is applied to the body by changing spatial orientation. Okay, so we have to add that to our equation when we're looking at pressure management and bottoming out and peak pressure points. If your client's sitting in a tilt chair or straight up vertical, that's going to change their position. And now if any of you came to my session yesterday with lateral tilt, then that also changes that orientation on the cushion. So we want to take a look at how is gravity being applied to the body in the client's resting posture, and active working posture too. Darn, is that why there's so many therapists not wanting to do this anymore? Because there's so much we have to think about. But it's great that there's so much we have to think about because now we're getting better product for our clients. So we then also want to look at the wheelchair setup for propulsion and function. We want to think about heights and angles and slopes and how do they reduce sliding, but how do they impact gravity on that pressure point. Okay, so we have to put those all together in that equation and not just say, oh, force doesn't matter. Okay, so when we're taking a look, excuse me, at a cushion for our client or out on the trade show when you go back out this afternoon, is taking a look at what is the potential of that cushion for immersion? How does it allow for pressures to be redistributed to away from bony prominences, away from those areas to larger flat bones? What is the envelopment characteristics? So that's how much that cushion deforms around the irregularities without causing a greater increase in pressure around those areas. What is the effect of the pressure gradients? So the ability of the cushion to maintain the flow of the tissue and the tissue's fluid components from high areas of pressure to those of low pressure. I want to think about the shape and the mechanical properties of the material that's holding. So we talk about the material that's holding gel, the material that's holding the foam, which is actually the whole material of the foam, and the material that's holding the air. So we can't just talk about air cushions. We have to talk about the dynamics of it, what's holding it, what's the containment cell made of, and how does it function for the client. And then lastly, looking at how does it support through the larger bones, such as the thigh and the greater trochanter, because those are the areas where we offload to when we're doing active working postures. So propulsion, reaching forward. So I have to be considerate of all areas, not just the ITs. That is often the area we think about for pressure managers under the ITs, but we have to think about everything. And we have to think about those movements of the client on the cushion in order to change those areas that we're looking at. So we want to measure the effects of working posture and postural deformity on the interface distribution, the stability and the shearing, movement on the cushion, and then coming back to rest. We have to look at how does the client access the hand rim for propulsion or functional ADLs? Which way do they move? Do they always transfer off to one side? Do they always transfer off the right corner? Do they always transfer from the front to the back? Do they always land with their pelvis slightly off kilter? We see that with the MS population a lot. Okay, so we have to look at what happens with asymmetry, with lateral reach, forward reach, downward reach. And do the client tend to, the worst ones are the one hand, one foot propellers. Boom, down we go. And we tend to go into obliquity to that side and then rotation forward on that side. So those ones can often be the challenge of taking a look at stability when I'm moving on the cushion. So we also want to take a look at material for shear reduction and that center of mass and that seat slope. Again, in order to foot propel, the pelvis needs to constantly move forward and behind the IT. So you're going to have shearing. And where is that shearing occurring? And is it more down in the bottom of the cushion, or is that at the top of the cushion? What's happening? What's happening where we know that the center of rotation of the femur is in the acetabulum? Is the pelvis moving into anterior tilt, posterior tilt? What's happening with forward trunk positions? Is the client getting trunk extension? How does that all come into play? And then adding in, again, wheeling posture. Where does the client sit? Where is their body mass when they're wheeling? And how does that affect the movement of the pelvis? And recognizing that they need stability of that lower core, the lower extremities, in order to maximize all the effort of propulsion going out through the chair rather than through the body, okay? The other thing that we want to be mindful of is very much this tendency that we see in the geriatric population, where we have the pelvic and hamstring considerations, where the client starts getting tight hamstrings, which then pulls the pelvis into this posterior pelvic tilt. And now we have the client potentially sitting more forward on a seat cushion that perhaps was a chair that doesn't have a backrest that has been opened into more recline. Now the original seat cushion well is back here, and they're sitting up on the front edge of that IT shelf. And now we're having pain and more sliding. And what happens is that as that client tries to move forward, they actually start doing this more. And now they can't breathe. The diaphragm doesn't have the room to move. Everything is getting squished inside of there. So we have problems with bowel and bladder. And so we have to understand as well that when we're looking at a cushion, we also have to consider the chair setup at the same time and make sure that the angles equal the angles for the client based on their pelvic tendencies and what's reducible and what not. Okay, so just thinking about propulsion, because again, that's one of those big dynamic pieces that we're doing on the cushion if your client is. So we have to consider the height of the seat for foot contact and loading on the floor, and where is the location of that contact, so that when I'm working with a client with foot propulsion, I want to be thinking about the thickness of the cushion at the front. If that client is coming underneath for that excursion, where is the front edge of the cushion? How is it impacting the back of the calf? Where does the client contact? And if they're sitting in a chair that's too high, like this one right now, what's my client going to do? To get the foot on the ground, okay? So again, it's all in that height. It's also in the height of the hand rims. So that client who maybe had a hemi-height chair, so a really low seat to floor height because they used to be foot propelling, but now they're hand propelling. And the wheels are way down here, but they've got contracted shoulders and elbows, and now they're above the wheel. So what do they do to get to the wheel? Oh, let's do it again. Here I am, okay? So that seat to floor height is critical for both hand and foot propellers. And we want to get the proper seat depth for that lower leg excursion. I want to look at 3-point positioning in the seat and back for all propulsion. Anyone who is wheeling a manual wheelchair, whether it be with your feet or with your hands, should always have some type of a back support in combination with the cushion. And I want to reemphasize why that is. When you're sitting in your chair and you do this, do that. Simon says. What have you got your hands on? Your pelvis. Take your hands this way. What have you got your hands on? Your pelvis. What's that pelvis against? The back. So you can't control the pelvis through the cushion only. You have to control it through the back. So if you're trying to prevent sliding during propulsion, you better have a good back support on there before you even look at the cushion contours to prevent that extreme rotation of the pelvis into posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so we want to block that, allow for it to come forward, because the physics says it comes forward and then goes to rest. It comes forward and goes to rest. It doesn't go backwards. So we want to block the posterior, and then I can look at the contours of the cushion for the IT shelf to block the ITs from sliding forward from there. That's our 3-point positioning. What's the third point? The positioning belt, not the seat belt, the positioning belt. That's where we come into problems with restraints and all of that. But it's a positioning belt to help hold the pelvis down into the contours of the cushion and the back support. We also want to look at thoracic extension. So we want to allow the trunk to come up and above that back support. And we want to have front stability for transfers as well. So when we think about a client who is propelling, probably they're a little bit more active and maybe can still do an independent transfer. How does that transfer occur? Is it a front standing? I'm going to push off the chair. Is it a slide transfer? Now I'm pushing off the front edge of my cushion to get forward. Or sometimes people push here to get their bum forward before they come forward. So we have to look at where is that stability that's required for the client who is doing a self-transfer. So, after all that, raise your hand if you believe there is a difference between different air cushions. Yes, because it now is not the air is the same. Nobody's changing the air. The air density is always the same. But we have to take a look at the shape and the membrane of the air containment cells for comfort, for stability without sacrificing the pressure reduction or the comfort. And we have to look at how the air flows between the channels, between the cells, in order to contain it so it all just doesn't go and when you sit on it and then comes back in. So we have to make sure that we're getting stability and stimulation of blood circulation at the same time. So here's a original CG Air cushion, and here's a client who is self-propelling. This was my dad. My dad's no longer with us, but he did self-propel on a CGA air cushion with his feet. And you can see that we've got nice contact all the way through the eye. Oh my gosh, the eye through the knee. But there is no collapse at the front edge. And that's always been an issue or a concern of people putting people on an air cushion for foot propulsion, that there's going to be collapse at the front and they're going to slide out. Okay, so you can see on this that there is no collapse there. And he did a little shuffle is how he always moved his chair, where he moved his feet a little bit and with his hands a little bit as well. So it was important to keep the right posture, back support, support under his thighs, allow the feet to the ground, but also allowing him to get his hands to access the wheel as well. So there he goes. He had Parkinson's, so it was a little bit of a challenge for him. But he was able to manage doing a little bit of both and maintain postural control. Phew, I was glad it all worked for him. So that leads us now to today to talk about the CG Air cushion, but compared to if you attended last year, which I did, on this cushion, we now have a new one called the Performa Air, CG Air, and it's an updated model of what they had from before. And so what's changed, and feel free to jump in, guys, but basically the containment cell has changed. Oh, we did. I'm gonna pass around these two, and I want you to feel the tops of them. I'll just put them down here. So feel kind of how it feels between the two. This is the old one. This is the new one. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to feel because you should feel it. All right. So you can also sit on them, compare if you want, but we're also going to do a sitting test at the end. But just for now, feel the cells. So here's all of the information about it. But basically, what has been changed is the lower portion is thicker. That gives more stability to the cell containment. Also, the cell shape has changed a little bit, coming in more at the top, and the top is a little thinner, giving you, for the first two people, that softer feel. Okay? So you've got a change in the feeling or the comfort of the cushion. You also have the softer for the immersion, but the stability for the shearing with the thicker part at the bottom. So we've gained both comfort and stability and mobility all at the same time with the new cell containment, okay? So again, 15% thinner on the upper. The original airflow rate is there for consistent performance between the cushion, but that's the main difference between the two. And there you can see just putting that on. With that, again, we have the stability, so we've got the immersion, but we're not seeing the cells go this way, okay? So they're not splaying out when that computer is being pushed down into them. Okay. So the mechanical performance, the difference here is so we are pulling up the difference between this being the CG Air, with the PVC material versus the traditional air cushion with the neoprene. And so you can see, I don't have a pointer on here. No, I don't. Sorry. So you can see with the image of the buttocks coming down in here. So we're getting the immersion and the envelopment that we want through this material versus this one, we're getting immersion, but not so much the envelopment because the cells are splaying. Okay, so we're not getting that full surface contact that we want to achieve to maintain stability. So the splaying is not going to give as much stability. Okay. There we can see it on a pressure mapping. So again, with the limited stretch, so we're getting the nice immersion coming down through, a nice equal pressure on the pressure map, and we have 56.57 milligrams of mercury versus here we have 60 on the one that's splaying, meaning that it's coming down heavier because they're splaying, it's not holding, it's not getting that surface contact, okay? So that's ultimately what we're looking at, that we have less stretch of the containment cells, so that's gonna promote better skin protection, pressure injury prevention, but at the same time, we're gonna get stability as well, okay? Now, with the CG Air Performa, we have the capacity to have a single valve, but you can have also a dual compartment configuration. So you can configure it in a side-to-side segment where you can work with some pelvic obliquity or some lateral rotation by having one side higher than the other. So you can do it front to back, or you can do it, front to back, side to side there, front to back, where you can put it in to add in an pre-ischial bar, and you can set correct. I can set how many cells forward that is. So I can set it so I can have a front to back segment. So the back I can put a little bit lower, the front a little bit higher to get more of that ischial shelf kind of built into that. The other thing that they have done with the new one is that they've reconfigured where the valve is. Okay, so this is the old one off the front corner like everybody's normally was. And now this one is starting back here so that it now is coming forward, comes out from the front of the cushion here, so it's still accessible by the client. And forgive me, tell me again why you did that.
In order to prevent those classic issues where
right, transfers, and you're hitting the valve on the front corner there and then damaging, and that's often where it tears and the valve is gone, and so now it's back further. So with that front transfer or those foot propulsion people, you're not damaging the valve. Yeah, okay. So that's changed again. Everything being seamless as well, so that integration, there's no lines where you're going to have an intermediate tear, that is kind of there ready to tear as well. So they also will still do custom modifications, so the client has a leg length discrepancy and or you want to cut out for the back canes. Whatever design you want to say, you can tell them and they'll do the number of cells however you want it to be in all of the different cushion sizes. They have as well now a new cover. You're going to see those covers when you come up because you're all going to come up and try them. And if any of you were there this morning, Rick did a great job talking about them, but basically they have the spacer fabric. So again, thinking about a comfort feel, breathable, four-way stretch, so it allows for that immersion to get down into the cushion. You can have the single layer or the double layer where it allows for better microclimate protection. And easy to see colored zippers, just everything trying to keep it easier for the staff and care with the transport handle as well. And the integrated little pocket for the valve, so you can tuck it in and bring it out as well. And The new one, though, is what they've added to it, which is, it's the first that I've seen, I may be wrong, but a material to grip without changing immersion. So always in the past, grippier things create more of a drum surface that doesn't allow for the immersion. But now you have a surface that's going to help give that contact, keep the bum back without it sliding forward or sliding too much. So you can have it with or without, because some people, again, need to be able to slide on their cushion when they have the capacity to weight shift and need to. But for those clients who don't, and you want to help prevent some of that forward movement, then you can go with this cover, which has the grip pieces on it, the GripZone. Okay, so again, targeted to keep the ITs back into the cushion. New with this cushion is now the Anatomic contour seat insert. So now I can customize a flat cushion into a contour cushion to give my client even more stability at the same time as getting the immersibility. So we have protection back here. So this is going to come up under the gluteal mass to help hold the bum center into the chair so they're not going off one side or the other. And you can see it's got I'm going to pass it around. You'll see the nice angled shelf here that follows. We should have brought the pelvis. I'll just back up a slide here. So if we think about the line here is always on an angle, this coming in from the greater trochanter underneath the head of the femur to the IT, that's not a straight down cut, it's an angle. So that's going to help support, and I'm not going to say offload the IT, but support the IT from going straight down and getting the high pressure. Okay, so we have that. We have the greater trochanter cutout though, so that we have mobility there, so that when there is movement of the leg, especially in for propulsion, you're not getting any shearing against the head of the greater trochanter. We have a small little IT shelf here, and perhaps more to come in the future. I won't talk about it, but maybe some more positioning pieces. So pass that around. So that will go underneath any of the CG Air cushions. But because of the contour, they can also go down in cell size. Because the contour allows for improved positioning, you don't need as much immersion. So instead of going with a 4-inch flat cushion, I can go with a 3 or a 2 and still get good immersion and skin contact because it's added more contour to the cushion, okay? And then we also have, oops, forgot to go back. The pouch that Rick talked about, that's the handy dandy, everybody wants the pouch that's removable off the front, so it helps to hold your stuff. But as well, I'm just going to move forward to the transfer trellis. So that's what this is, okay? So the transfer trellis can go across the front edge of the cushion for those foot propellers so that it gives, again, more stability across the front edge of the cushion to keep it from sinking down into that space when the client is pulling their foot through. But it also gives a more stable surface support for the client who's doing a side transfer where they put their hand on the front corner. So it's not going down right into the valve or the front corner seat pan of the chair. You can also go sideways this way, front to back, for that client who always side transfers off to one side. So it just gives some more stability to those cells. And what it does is it slips right over. So this one is on here, so it's way down here. It slips over the cells to the very bottom. So the client's not sitting on this. It's just giving stability to that area of the cushion, okay? I'll pass that around. The cutout here is so that the valve, when it is in the front piece this way, then the valve sits under there, so it's not getting impacted as well. So there's just, again, taking a look at the valve and filling it the standard. I'm not sure if everybody is aware when you are filling these air valves, you're pumping it up. There, it's filling up. A lot of clients will at this point in time now take the rubber piece off instead of turning it shut. So make sure you turn it shut and then take the rubber off the valve. That's how you maintain the air within the cushion, okay? Still, again, very easy to maintain and repair with the Loctite glue. It's easy to fix with that. No patches are required. You just put the glue around the area, available in hardware stores, and it doesn't stick to Boost and all those protein drinks and everything else that gets stuck down in there. Can be cleaned with gentle soap. Doesn't absorb like neoprene, so you're not going to get the odors that you can get with some of the air cushions. So again, cleaning the cushion is quite easy and meets all the standards for the long-term care facilities that we have to meet nowadays. Okay, so clinical capability. What we're looking at here of talking about the difference in containment of the Performa CGA air cushion, which is a PVC material versus a neoprene material. And so what we have is good load distribution because of the mechanical properties. So that thickness, the thinness, the holding of the cells. It provides a larger effective contact surface, lower average interface pressure all the way around. So it's taking it from the high pressure points off to the low pressure points. Is giving us the postural stability. So it's decreasing that likelihood of that posterior pelvic tilt sliding because it's got low stretch to the material. So it's not stretching out as the client moves on it. We now have the anatomic contour that's going to go underneath if you want it to have that better positioning of the pelvis. You can do that anti-thrust by having the dual compartment front to back and the GripZone added on even more so in the cover to help maintain stability for your clients. So here we go. Just looking at the lateral stability as well. So you can see that when she's leaning sideways and front to back, we're not having that splaying. So we're getting the crunch, yes, because the air is moving from that, but the cells aren't splaying out when that movement is occurring. And I saw this for myself last year when I was at, or I guess it was still this year, at ISS, and I put this cushion on the Chill Care chair, the Curio, and put it into lateral tilt and didn't feel myself going whoo out, which was my test. And it was like, okay, this works. Because if I was on a neoprene cushion, I would feel like I'm starting to slide and holding on to the armrest. So it really did work in that situation. So if you want to try that today, you can, because the Curio's downstairs and the cushion's here, and you can go and try it on their chair if you want just to see that, but it really does work. So with foot propulsion, again, you can get unilateral or bilateral propulsion with improved responsiveness. So again, you could do 1 foot, 1 hand propulsion and do the dual compartment side to side. So you're supporting the non-propelling leg, letting down on the other side. So you're going to get less of that rotation and definitely enhancing the transfers with the thickness of the cell at the bottom, plus the transfer trellis that helps with that support. And so again, we just have a person here with doing that foot propulsion. And you can see the cells are staying where they need to stay to provide that amount. And with the hand propulsion as well, we're still getting the movement. Okay. There you go. So to finish my piece, you're not done and you're not allowed to go out yet, because what we're going to do is try these all out. But what I want you to do is kind of, when you think about it, you have to document your findings. You have to justify why you're doing what we're doing. Because one of the things that I get so frustrated with in this industry, and I've been in it forever, is that people don't like going with something new. They go back to the me too. Well, it worked for me. And one of the biggest things that bother me, I worked as a dealer rep as well as a therapist, is that I would see reps pushing product. Well, this works for all MS people. What? We don't define ourselves as MS people or spinal cord people. And again, that challenge right now is getting nursing to understand that seating is more than cushion. There's nothing wrong with in the sense that it was the first one out there, but there's many different things out there now that can promote what we're trying to do. And so you guys are now my ambassadors to go out there and say there's something different, there's something that we have to think about, we have to think about more. And the only way you can do that is documenting your findings. So we have to think about when you're doing your assessment, summarizing what is the client's working posture for propulsion, what is their resting posture, how do they transition between the two, what is their skin risk, what are their pressure points, do they have shearing, what is their comfort, their cleaning, their airflow, the mobility, how far are they going, how long are they going for, what needs to be accomplished once they're there, and how far do they have to go back from what they're doing, and how is that cushion going to maintain their posture, stability, balance, and most importantly, comfort through that whole time. Okay? So, definitely, I do believe that this cushion is a step above the rest. What we have to think about is that above and beyond the wheelchair setup, the cushion can make all the difference in comfort and stability. We have to consider the materials, the airflow, and the stability, as well as the mobility and comfort. And air is more than a breath or the wind around you. It's the enclosure of it that makes the difference in seated support, as well as pressure relief, and that can create that huge comfort environment for your client. So I really, really, really challenge you to think about that.